Well, how are you all doing? What a talk from Billy Crone, huh? Just opens our eyes to what's really taking place in the world. You know, this has been an interesting travel year for me, a lot of first-time experiences, this being one of them. I've never been to Canada before. Uh, yeah, I'm loving it. In April, Billy Crone and I went to Australia together. That was a first for both he and I. Billy's been here a few times to Canada. But, you know, I live in Palm Desert, which is by Palm Springs, California, a couple hours east of Los Angeles, which is where a lot of Canadians, we call them snowbirds, start flocking down toward there to get into that beautiful weather where we've got the 70 and 80 degree weather. And that usually starts to happen around the Thanksgiving time. And our place goes from a ghost town into a major city. Anyway, it's great to be here today. Today I'm going to be talking about, if I can get the slideshow going, we're going to be talking about a couple Middle East war prophecies, epic war prophecies that are stage-setting to find their final fulfillment. The Middle East war prophecies of Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38, you know, ancient prophecies written several thousand years ago, are about to roll off their parchments and pound down on the pavement, and they will pack a powerful punch because we're talking about end times biblical prophecies. And end times biblical prophecies, as Billy was showing in the book of Revelation, they are globally impacting. You know, J. Barton Payne, who wrote the Encyclopedia of Bible Prophecy, says about 26.8% of the Bible is devoted toward predictive information, toward Bible prophecies. There's about 31,000 verses in the Bible. That would put us at around 9,000 verses that were given by God, as I said to Eric, a gift to us and to the various generations to know about the times in which they live. So that's about 9,000 verses, and many of those, thousands of those verses have already found fulfillment exactly as the details specified, which tells us the several thousand are yet remaining to find fulfillment will also find fulfillment exactly as specified. We're going to be looking today at really powerful prophecies that will shape the Middle East and the world. Now, all these several thousand verses of prophecies that are about to find fulfillment will not all happen obviously at the same time. So what I do is I try to sequence them into three different categories. Now prophecies which could happen at the present time. They lack preconditions. I'll show you that slide in a minute. Next, prophecies which will follow the now. And then there's the last prophecies where you're dealing with the Antichrist and those judgments and things Billy were talking about. But as Billy said, they are all starting to converge right now, which is one of the major indicators that many of us believe tells us we are living deep, not just into the end times, but deep on the end times line. So when it comes to the now prophecies, I've got a book series that I've written dealing with the now, next, and last prophecies that tries to chronologically order these events and sequence these events as they will start to find fulfillment. The now prophecies are the unfulfilled ancient predictions that appear to be imminent, which means they can happen now. These foretellings have either minor or no remaining preconditions inhibiting them from happening at the present time, which means that's what now means. We could wake up one morning and the now prophecies could find fulfillment. And it's the now prophecies throughout the generations that benefited the affected populations the most. So for instance, Noah, he had a now prophecy that a worldwide flood was coming. And he got busy and prepared for that. We had Joseph that had a now prophecy that there'd be 7 years of famine coming, but he would be preceded by 7 years of plenty. So he got busy and prepared for those 7 years of famine. And Jeremiah is another example. He had to prepare the people of Judah for a 70 years of captivity that was forthcoming. But Jeremiah also talked about prophecies that I'll be talking about tonight that have not found fulfillment yet, that I believe are now prophecies for our time. So what are the now prophecies for our time that we need to think about and prepare for? Well, there's a few of them. There's a disaster in Iran, probably a nuclear disaster in Iran, a destruction of Damascus in Isaiah 17, a toppling of Jordan, a terrorization of Egypt, a final Arab-Israeli war, which I'll be talking about in Psalm 83, an expansion of Israel in the aftermath, little tiny Israel. Something's going to happen there. They're going to grow. And the vanishing of the Christians, which could happen at any given time, the rapture. There are no signs. It's a signless event. It's an imminent event. It could happen at any given time. Some of these prophecies I'll be talking about in my talk today. Now, conversely, the next prophecies, which will follow, and I'll be talking about some next prophecies as well, they have at least one or more significant preconditions prohibiting their final fulfillment. Although these next prophecies appear to be presently stage-setting, their completion is being prevented by some other epic prophetic event or series of events. So I have a book that follows out there on the next, called The Next Prophecies, and some of them are the destruction of Russia, which we'll be talking about in Ezekiel 38. The upholding of God's holy name before the world. The Lord is going to let the world know He's the covenant-keeping God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the promise-keeping God of Jesus Christ, and He's going to do that in this Ezekiel 38 invasion. The decline of Islam. Yes, Allah is about to lose His Akbar, His greatness. When the terrorist blows himself up, he goes, Allahu Akbar. Allah is the greater, or the greatest God. Well, that's about to change. There'll be a harlot world religion coming. There'll be 144,000 Jewish witnesses on the scene, evangelizing. There'll be an Antichrist that emerges on the scene. And there'll be Christian martyrdom of the Fifth Seal saints and other saints. Now, if you want to know how these type of prophecies will affect you individually as they start to happen, and in many cases, if the rapture, the next prophecies will probably happen after the rapture. So like Billy said, it's more so about the people we love that we're concerned about when it comes to these next prophecies. I've written a novel out there of the next prophecies, what will happen to a family that gets left behind and experiences them. So let's now talk about Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38. Psalm 83, written 3,000 years ago by Asaph, we'll be unpacking that shortly. I call it an inner circle of countries that share common borders with Israel. You see a map up there of an inner circle surrounding Israel. There are ancient names that the time Asaph wrote are superimposed upon their modern day equivalents. You have Assyria over Syria. You have Tyre, which is in Lebanon. I'll be showing you more maps as we go. I'm very lines of force driven on my PowerPoint slides. But they are Israel's ancient enemies. They share common borders with Israel. They've harbored a hatred since time immemorial against Israel, and they will be involved in a confederacy in Psalm 83. Now, conversely, Ezekiel 38 is I call it an outer ring of countries. You see a map here. Similarly, their ancient names superimposed upon their modern-day equivalents. Magog up there by Russia, Togarmah, Tubal over there by Turkey, Persia is Iran. And again, I'll show some more maps on that. But Ezekiel 38 gives us a specific identity of who these 9 coalition members are, and you see a map of them. Now, notice, none of them share common borders with Israel. None of them have ever been Israel's notorious enemies in the past. And all of them are not Arabs. However, most all of them are Muslim, except for Russia. So you're going to see that we've actually got 2 Muslim-dominated wars coming against Israel. So today what I'm going to show you is why Psalm 83 is a prophecy. Some people think it's just simply a prayer, an imprecatory prayer of lament. Why Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38 are different prophecies. Some people think they're one and the same. Why Psalm 83 actually precedes Ezekiel 38. Why Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38 are both pre-tribulation events, pre-tribulation prophecies. Why Psalm 83 was not fulfilled in the Arab-Israeli War of 1948, not entirely. Why Psalm 83 is a now prophecy, could happen at the present time. Why Ezekiel 38 is a next prophecy. Now, many of my colleagues and some of you here today might be thinking Ezekiel 38 could happen at the present time. But I'm going to show you there are some preconditions that I think need to be dealt with before it could happen at the present time. However, it is definitely stage setting. We just recently on September 7th had the 3 leaders of 3 key countries, Turkey, Iran, and Russia, meet together in Tehran to discuss the normalization of Syria after that 7-year resolution. So these guys are already coming together, and who knows, these may actually be the leaders of the countries at the time Ezekiel 38 happens. But their alliances are being built. Iran and Russia have never had stronger relationships. Iran has recently received the S-300 missile defense system from Russia. They have a Bushehr nuclear reactor in an area of Iran, and Russia has contracted to build 8 more of them. So then that relationship is only going to get stronger. Turkey is building its relationship with Russia as well. By 2023, they'll have a $20 billion nuclear facility Russia's going to put together inside of Turkey. And so the list goes on that gives us indications that Ezekiel 38 is drawing very, very near. But is it next? Or is it now? And so we'll look at that a little more closely. Now, when we get into Ezekiel 38, which is where we'll start, it's 52 verses, Ezekiel 38 and 39, of some of the easiest to understand biblical prophecies in the entire Bible. And I think God did that intentionally because it's the marquee event He's going to use to put the world on notice that He's the covenant-keeping God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So as you read Ezekiel 38 and 39, the golden rule of interpretation applies. This is a quote from David L. Cooper, who was the founder of the Biblical Research Society, and he lived between 1886 and 1965. And here's what he said when it comes to interpreting biblical prophecy and the Bible in general. When the plain sense of Scripture makes common sense, seek no other sense. Therefore, take every word at its primary, ordinary, usual, literal meaning, unless the facts of the immediate context, studied in the light of related passages and axiomatic and fundamental truths, indicate clearly otherwise. So what he's saying is when you read the biblical prophecy, if the plain sense makes common sense, seek no other sense. Interpret it literally. You don't need to allegorize it. You don't need to spiritualize it. And in many biblical prophecies, the details are very specific, and that's the case with Ezekiel 38. So that the first 6 verses tell us who these invaders are, the common consensus of who they are. You see them on the map up there, that outer ring of countries. We've got Russia and the southern steppes, breakaway of the Soviet Union, some of the southern steppes of Russia. We would say Turkey's involved, Iran, Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, Libya, some of the North African countries of Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia. Again, these are Muslim countries, apart from Russia. Now, the first thing I want to look at, because we're going to ask some questions and answer them at the end of my talk, that all of those countries coming against little tiny Israel, which is about the size of New Jersey, seems like overkill, doesn't it? Why does Russia, who could take out Israel on its own, need to come together with so many big friends? It would be almost like if Canada got together with all of America and Mexico to take out little tiny New Jersey. Seems a little bit unreasonable, doesn't it? Well, there's a reason for that. We'll answer that question. Why are there different enemies involved? We talked about an outer ring of countries. Never been Israel's enemies. We talked about an inner circle in Psalm 83. They have different motives. We'll uncover those as I talk. And they also have different defeats. We're going to answer those questions. Why are those the cases? Now, as we get past Ezekiel 38, verses 1 through 6, we get into some very specific information. Ezekiel 38, verses 10 through 13 is 8 actually through 13 gives us very important details about the Israel that gets invaded. So I'm going to read a few verses here. Thus says the Lord, this is verse 10 and 11 of Ezekiel 38, on that day, and this is in the latter days, this is a latter day prophecy, it shall come to pass that thoughts will arise in your mind, and you will make an evil plan, and you will say, I will go up against the land of unwalled villages. Notice I have certain words highlighted. We're going to look at those closely. I will go to a peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Now, Gog is typically considered to be like the leader of the Confederacy. So he would be, it's not necessarily mentioning a place, it's mentioning a person. And so he would be the leader. Maybe it's Vladimir Putin. We don't know that. But if it were to happen soon, it could be him. And then it goes on to talk about his evil plan is to take great plunder and to take great booty, Israel's livelihood, to stretch out your hand against the waste places that are again inhabited and against the people gathered from the nations who have acquired livestock and goods who dwell in the midst of the land. Something entices Russia to put together this formidable coalition to come after Israel's plunder and booty. And Israel's dwelling in specific conditions when this happens, and I'm going to show you that I don't believe all those conditions are in place. So what are those conditions? Well, there's the first 4 we'll look at is they're regathered from the nations of the world. And that's been going on, folks. They just celebrated their 70-year anniversary this past May 14th. In the latter years, how many of you think we could be living in the latter years? Yeah, a lot of hands going up. Brought back from the sword of persecution into a land of Israel which has long been desolate. We're going to say that has been going on. We've been watching that during our lifetimes. We could check that off and say that Israel so far exists in those conditions. But what about these other things? Are they a peaceful people, living in a land of unwalled villages, dwelling securely, without walls, bars, nor gates, having silver and gold and acquired livestock and goods, possessing plunder and great plunder? And we're talking about great plunder of the magnitude that Russia would put together such a formidable coalition to invade Israel. And I don't believe that's the case. So let's unpack that. Remember, if the plain sense makes common sense, seek no other sense. Let's look at this literally. Is Israel dwelling without walls, bars, nor gates in unwalled villages? Well, no, they're not. They've got a 403-mile partition wall that separates Palestinian terror. It runs down throughout pretty much the center of Israel for about 403 miles. At some points, it's 20 feet high, filled with concrete. And it's to keep Palestinian terror out of Israel proper. And then there's another set of facts going on that Israel's been surrounding itself by walls. They've been building and refortifying. Here's an article that just came out in the Times of Israel in September of 2018. A 30-foot tall border wall goes up. The IDF says Hezbollah and the Lebanese army are colluding. They're building a wall on the northern border of Israel where Lebanon comes. They're concerned about Hezbollah. And here's what it says. The Israeli military this week publicly unveiled its 11-kilometer long, 9-meter tall concrete border wall along the Lebanese border. The concrete barrier is designed to serve two main functions: protect Israeli civilians and soldiers from sniper attacks, and prevent infiltration into Israel by Hezbollah operatives. This is 7 miles long, at various points 29 feet high, and it began construction in early 2018, and they just brought it to our attention on September of this year. Notice that they're trying to prevent infiltration. That's why they used to build walls in Ezekiel's time, to prevent infiltration from invading forces. So they're not dwelling securely without walls in this estimate, as in my estimate. Here's a few more headlines. We'll just rifle through them quickly. Israel completes the Lebanon border wall around Metula. This came out in the Times of Israel in 2012. This is an entirely different section of fencing on the northern border of Israel. This came out in 2018, Times of Israel. Israel starts building a sea barrier. They're actually extending their protective hedges out into the ocean against Gaza attacks from the Hamas. Palestinian protesters are approaching and have been still approaching out from the Gaza, the border fence there. 3 killed, hundreds and injured clash. This is in April of 2018. So we got fences over there by the Gaza. Israel starts a massive fence on the southern border with Jordan. Even on the east side, where their moderate Arab country of Jordan, Israel is building a massive fence over there as well. Matter of fact, the Middle East is the most fenced-in and fortified region in the world, and Israel is the most fenced-in and fortified country in the Middle East. So, in my estimation, they're not dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates, at least not without walls, bars, nor gates. And you see a map here of the existing fences and walls in blue and the proposed ones being built. And look at Israel's got all these existing ones, and then even Saudi Arabia is proposing to build one to keep the Houthis from invading out of Yemen into Saudi Arabia. Is Israel dwelling securely? Well, the Hebrew words that Ezekiel uses are Yeshav Batak. He uses them twice. He says they'll come out of the nations and they'll dwell safely. They'll be a peaceful people who dwell safely. The Hebrew words mean not they're dwelling safely because some of diplomacy or land for peace deals, but because they've conquered their enemies. This is a precedence that Ezekiel gives us. They've conquered their enemies, and now they can dwell securely. They can take down walls. If Israel doesn't dwell securely, when will they? Well, Ezekiel actually tells us what it's going to take for Israel to dwell securely 10 chapters earlier in Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 24 through 26. And here's what he says. Thus says the Lord God, when I have gathered the house of Israel from the peoples among whom they are scattered, and am hallowed in them in the sight of the Gentiles, and we've already put check marks on that. That has been going on. Then they will dwell in their own land, which I gave to my servant Jacob, and they will dwell safely, Yeshav V'tak, the same Hebrew words for dwelling securely. They'll build houses and they'll plant vineyards. Yes, they will dwell securely, Yeshav V'tak. But when I execute judgments on all those around them who despise them, then they shall know that I am the Lord their God. So in other words, those around them who despise them need judgments executed upon them in order for Israel to dwell securely. What are those judgments? How will they happen? When will they happen? Does the Bible tell us about them? Well, I'll show you that it does. Are there people around Israel who despise them that will have judgments executed upon them? Well, they actually are Israel's notorious enemies. They came to war against them in 1948. They've been Syria is still at war with them. Hezbollah is up to the north, and Lebanon. They're actually all listed in the Psalm 83 inner circle of countries. And we'll be talking about that shortly. So how is God going to stop this massive, formidable invasion of Israel in the latter days for plunder and booty? He's not going to use the United States armies. He's not going to use the Israeli Defense Forces, although they exist in fulfillment of prophecy we'll look at shortly. He's going to do it himself. He is going to do a supernatural defeat of these invading armies and this formidable coalition that's going to come against Israel. Far too formidable for anyone to stop except him, the Lord himself. And he's doing it for the purposes, I'll show you, of upholding his holy name. So can you imagine? Now, I'll show you why I believe this is a pre-tribulation event. And we may be here for it, although we could be raptured prior. But could you imagine if you saw this on TV? Here comes Russia with this massive outer ring of countries coming down against Israel. And you're going, oh my goodness, what are they doing? How's Israel going to survive this? There's no way. And all of a sudden it says there'll be a great earthquake. And that'll create panic among the troops of Gog's troops. And every man's sword will come against his brother. And there'll be pestilence. And there'll be bloodshed. And there'll be flooding rain and great hailstones and fire and brimstone. And God will stop the invaders in their tracks. I mean, can you imagine watching that happen? This is not unlike any other military conquest in the history of the world. And in the aftermath, when he's done that, he can say to the world will be put on official notice. He can say, so I make my holy name known. This is Ezekiel 39, verse 7. In the midst of my people Israel, meaning there had to be Jews, Israelis, and there had to be a land of Israel. So that we have today. And I will not let them profane my holy name any more, then the nation shall know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. Now God will be able to clearly state that. That prophecy will be fulfilled there. Now that does not mean that all the nations of the world will jump on the Jesus train, or that the Jews will either. Actually, the way they'll want to respond is to reinstate their Mosaic law, their animal sacrifices, and build their temple. If it's not already built by then, and I don't think it will be at that time. We go on as we finish out Ezekiel 39. It even talks about the literal cleanup, the mop-up, the aftermath of the battle. We're told in Ezekiel 39, verses 9 through 16, the Israelis will actually burn weapons. They'll convert them into fuel for 7 years. Now, this is why some of us believe this event might happen before the tribulation period. Because if you understand the timeline of the tribulation period, it sections itself into the first 3.5 years and then the second 3.5 years, which is commonly called the Great Tribulation period. The first 3.5 years, Israel is living in what they consider to be a peace, but it's a pseudo-peace. That is because they had a covenant confirmed by the Antichrist in Daniel 9:27 with Israel and some other party. So they could actually burn weapons and convert the weapons into fuel for that first 3.5 years. But in the second half, they are to flee for their lives because the Antichrist is going to go into their temple. Even Jesus Christ says in Matthew 24, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet, he's warning the Jews to flee, because that's when the Antichrist is going to try to commit his final genocidal attempt of the Jews. In Zechariah 13:8, we're told 2/3 of the Jews will be cut off in the land of Israel. So it's not conducive for them to be burning weapons because they'll be fleeing for their lives. So they could burn weapons 3.5 years before the tribulation. They could burn weapons 3.5 years in the first part of the tribulation. But it's not likely that they will be burning weapons in the second half of the tribulation. If anything, they'll be grabbing weapons to use them as they flee. Then they're going to be buried in this valley called Hamon-Gog, which doesn't even exist yet today. It's east of some sea in the valley, and the options. I believe it's in Jordan, and I believe Israel will have possession of Jordan. I'll show you those prophecies in a moment. At the time of Ezekiel 38, at least portions of Jordan, it's probably not going to be east of the Sea of Galilee. I got a red circle up there because that's not necessarily a valley that's conducive for burying a lot of troops. It's in the Syria areas per se. It's probably not going to be east of the Mediterranean because that's Israel proper. So the likely candidate will be over in Jordan, and it's a place that will eventually be called the Valley of Hamon-Gog, which means the hordes of Gog. And they'll be burying the dead there for 7 months. See how specific these details are? They'll actually be burying the contaminated corpses for 7 months. And in the process, that little tiny Israel is going to gain world renown, and we're told in those verses. So the world's going to be in shock. They're going to see their God supernaturally defeated, the most massive, armed, and dangerous Mideast invasion of all time, supernaturally. And they're going to see Israel in the aftermath doing these things, and the world is going to be in awe. Israel will gain world renown. So that's Ezekiel 38. I don't believe it's a now prophecy because Israel is not dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates just yet. And now we're going to turn our attention to Psalm 83, the Arab-Israeli war prophecy. In 2006, there seemed to have been some prophetic indicators that were important for us to watch. The stage was starting to be set. In 2006, July of 2006, a construction worker in Ireland was on a project with his bulldozers, and he was preparing to do a project out there, and it was called to a halt in this muddy bog soil because they found these ancient antiquities, these parchments that had been buried there for almost 1,200 years, they estimate. At the time, it was heralded as the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovery in Ireland. World in the Daily, New York Times said Irish Boggs Dead Sea Scrolls called a major discovery. These were written in Latin, and what there was about 22 parchments, many fragmented. They're in the Ireland Museum. They're trying to restore them, and they're having a hard time with that. 22 psalms, but one of them was left in place and opened at the time, and that was Psalm 83. Now, so you had headlines going out with the Associated Press, Ancient Book of Psalms found in Irish Bog. But WorldNet Daily had a headline at the time saying, Psalm in a Bog linked to Israel's current war. And that's the thing that was interesting, because 2 weeks before this discovery was made, Israel had been in a war with Hezbollah. It turned out to be a 34-day campaign, and many Israelis were in bomb shelters for about 30 days, for about a month. 4,000 missiles were lobbed at Israel. It was a major war that was going on in the middle of that time frame. This was not an archaeological dig. They found this Psalm 83 in this bog soil. Now, what I find interesting, is this coincidence or is this providence? Because if you look at the 31,000 verses in the Bible, the 150 Psalms, the 1,189 chapters in the Bible, the only place you would ever find any resemblance of anything that could be considered Hezbollah, and we're going to see them as probably the inhabitants of Tyre in Psalm 83, and Israel in a confrontation is, guess where? Psalm 83. So during that war, out of nowhere, buried in the Irish bog soil, should have been destroyed, Psalm 83 appears. Was that an indicator? At the same time, I was about to release my book called Israelistine, which deals with the Psalm 83 epic war, and it talks about the prelude and the episode and the aftermath. So I was preparing to release that book. It was a vastly overlooked prophecy. It got Hal Lindsey, Chuck Missler, Dr. David Reagan, Gary Stearman, many names you might know, prophetic names, talking and teaching about Psalm 83, rethinking and changing their end times model, because all they had been considering was Ezekiel 38, Ezekiel 38. Now that book has since been upgraded as I dealt with the objections to my writings, my research after the Arab Spring. So we decided to upgrade that book that's out there called Psalm 83. Now, Asaph wrote Psalm 83. He was one of King David's worship leaders. He wrote 12 psalms. You see the list of them up there. And Psalm 50 is very prophetic. Psalm 83 is very prophetic. But more than just being a worship leader, now this is where we're going to say this is more than just a prayer, an imprecatory prayer. He was actually a prophet, like Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Isaiah. We're told in a couple verses that King Hezekiah and the leaders commanded the Levites to sing praise to the Lord, and the words of David and of Asaph the seer. The Hebrew word is krasah, and it means a beholder of vision, a prophet. We're also told in 1 Chronicles 25 verse 2, the sons of Asaph are under the direction of Asaph, who prophesied according to the order of the king. Prophesied according to the order of the king. So we had a prophet here who wrote 12 psalms, and of all the psalms he wrote, Psalm 50 and Psalm 83 appear to be the most prophetic. And what does it say? Psalm 83 verses 1 through 6. Do not keep silent, O God, do not hold your peace, and do not be still, O God, for behold, your enemies make a tumult, and those who hate you have lifted up their head. They have taken crafty counsel against your people, and consulted together against your sheltered ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. For they have consulted together with one consent, they form a confederacy against you. Asaph is petitioning God to deal with a confederacy that's going to form crafty counsel, a contemporary group of countries that have a explicit goal to destroy the nation of Israel, to banish the name of Israel, that it will be wiped off the map and remembered no more. And Asaph is concerned about this. And this prophecy came to Asaph at a time when the Israelis were basking in the glory. They had their King David. They were talking about building their temple. They were winning wars. And he gets this prophecy. This is not a chronological ordering of Israel's enemies. This is a contemporary confederacy that wants to wipe Israel off of the map. And he's going to go ahead and tell us who they are shortly. Verses 8 through 12, 6 through 8, he goes on and says, he lists these 10 different members by their ancient names. The tents of Edom, and the Ishmaelites, and Moab, and the Hagarenes, and Gebal, and Ammon, and Amalek, and Philistia. Remember, when he wrote, he did not have Palestinians, and Jordanians, and Hamas. He had Edomites, and Ammonites, and Megabites, and termites, and gigabytes, and all that AI stuff that's coming in now. So it goes on, and he's got the whole list there, but I want you to notice I've got some refugees. These are Palestinian refugees living in tents, and he's in the very first member of this 10-member coalition. I've got it highlighted in big. He's got them in a habitation condition, the tents of Edom. Now, when you see a habitation condition like the tents of in the Bible, it either means refugee conditions or military encampments. So I believe he was alerting us to the tents of Edom, and they became a reality after the War of 1948, and the Edomites have ethnical representation in the Palestinians today. Not all Palestinians are Edomites, but they do. I've traced ethical representation into the Palestinians from Edomite descent. He's got them listed first, and when you see them somebody listed first in a coalition, like you saw Gog and Magog listed first, like watch out, Russia's probably the big leader there. He's got the Palestinians and apparently their plight there listed as refugees. That's going to have their friends and coalition around them that want to wipe Israel off of the map. So let's see how this plays out. And by the way, their motive is different than Ezekiel 38 that wanted plunder and booty, great plunder and booty. They actually say to themselves, the reason we want to wipe Israel off the map is we want to take for ourselves the pastures of God, the promised land for our possession. They want the land of Israel. So here's a map of who they are at Asaph's time. You see the Gebal and Tyre and Ammon and Philistia over there where the Hamas are and that sort of thing. And I've got the tents of Edom listed boldly. They became a reality after the War of 1948, and I believe this is a picture of them in 1949 in a refugee camp in Jordan. So here's their modern day equivalents on the map. They were in that inner circle, not in that outer ring of Ezekiel 38 countries, not mentioned once in Ezekiel 38. So you see they got Lebanon up there with about 150,000 missiles pointed at Israel right now, a proxy of Iran. Syria with chemical weapons. And then you see you got Jordan and Egypt. The Hamas, of course, have been lobbing missiles into Israel. Some people say, well, look, Jordan and Egypt have peace treaties with Israel, and we'll address that. We're going to look at prophecies dealing with Jordan where those peace treaties don't come into play. Because some people say this was fulfilled in 1948, and I'll tell you how that probably did not happen. We can't use that as a guide. So here's what happened in after World War I. The Ottoman Empire was defeated, and they had controlled the Middle East for about 400 years. And then we start to see that the Arab states start to come into place. Egypt in 1922, as Britain and France started to take over the Middle East. Saudi Arabia and Iraq, 1932. Iran, formerly Persia, in 1935. And you had Lebanon, 1943, Syria and Jordan. And then Israel comes along in 1948. Well, those countries, those Arab states that got their statehood prior to Israel being rebirthed, they voted against there being in Israel in the United Nations. As a matter of fact, when Israel became a nation, they came to war against Israel, and they told the Arabs that were living in what was called Palestine since 135 AD. Now it's going to be called Israel. They told them to get out because we're not going to let there be in Israel. We voted against it. We're going to go to war against Israel. It will not happen. We need 5 days. Come out, and then we'll defeat them with our formidable armies. They're just a bunch of refugees coming out of the Holocaust. And then you can go back and take over their neighborhoods and their communities. And these were the Arabs of Palestine. Well, that was a terrible miscalculation. They lost that war. Israel won it with just a few fighter jets, strategically placed hand grenades dropped out, glass milk bottles dropped out, and they won that war. Actually, God won that war for them. So all of a sudden you have this Palestinian refugee crisis, and here's a picture of them as a result in 1949, the tents of Edom. So one of the things I say is the Palestinian refugees, the tents of Edom, weren't even a reality at the time of 1948 to dispel that potential fulfillment at that time. Here's who they are today. Of course, they're armed and dangerous. They've got big friends. There's a picture of the Hamas. So Asaph goes on to tell us how he would like God to deal with this confederacy that wants to wipe Israel off the map in verses 9 through 12. And he says, deal with them as with Midian, as with Sisera, as with Jabin, and at the brook of Kishon, who perished at Endor, who became as refuse on the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, yes, their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, let us take for ourselves the pastures of God for a possession. So what he's saying, what he's petitioning God to do, we have to draw our attention back to the book of Judges, chapters 4 through 8. And he's talking about battles with Gideon against the Midianites, and at the time of Deborah the prophetess against the Canaanites. And I want to talk about that for a minute, but what I want you to recognize, he's not saying deal with them like he did with Pharaoh at the Red Sea. Remember, at that time, there had been no Israeli defense forces per se. They were just simply refugees coming out of about 400 years of Egyptian captivity. But what he has at his time, about 3,000 years ago, is military precedent from the books of Judges, and he's drawing our attention to that. He's telling the Lord to empower the Israeli defense forces to deal with the enemies like they did in the book of Judges. So we look at, for instance, when he talks about Midian, Gideon's little 300-man army in Judges chapter 6 through 8, the Midianites had oppressed the Israelis for about 7 years, and Gideon was called to end that oppression, and he, with the help of the tribe of Ephraim and his little 300-man army, killed 120,000 Midianites. They killed their infantry. The Zebah and Zalmunna that is mentioned here, those were the kings. They were killed by Gideon. Oreb and Zebah, the princes, were killed by Gideon's men. They took out everyone, the infantry all the way to the leaders. And the Midianites, you'll never find another reference to them in the Bible or in history ever oppressing the Israelis again, the Jews again. The Canaanites oppressed the Jews for 20 years. Deborah comes on, the prophetess, and her general Barak. She says, we are going to go take out the oppression of the Canaanites. King Jabin was the king of the Canaanites. Sisera, mentioned in here, was his general. And the Barak's army defeated them. And you'll never see that the Canaanites ever oppress Israelis again, the Jews again. So what I believe we've got here is another reason this has not found final fulfillment yet. And I'll show you there's more reasons in just a moment. Because they have not taken away the oppression that has oppressed them for a long time. Those Arabs still around them still oppress them. So another reason why I don't believe it's found its final fulfillment yet. And he goes on to tell them that when this happens, these are battle terms. Make them like whirling dust, chaff before the wind, stubble the burning wood, blazing mountain fire, like the tempest before the storm. That has not happened just yet. Arabs are still around there. There's still enemies around Israel that need judgments executed upon them. That's why Israel can't dwell securely. There was another war that happened, the Six-Day War in 1967, further oppression against the Jews. That's why it was not necessarily fulfilled in 1948. The surprise attack, the Yom Kippur War in 1973. So we see the oppression has still continued to go on. Therefore, I don't see that psalm has found a final fulfillment just yet, and you'll see more reasons in a moment. And he goes on to conclude the psalm, which has not happened yet. He says, fill their faces, those Arabs around Israel, that inner circle, with shame, that they may seek your name, O Lord. Let them be confused and dismayed forever. Yes, let them be put to shame and perish, that they may know that you, whose name alone is the Lord, are the Most High over the earth. Let them know that God, Jehovah of the Bible, is the Most High above all the earth. We're going to look at that more closely as to how significant that statement is right there. That has not happened yet. So I'm going to shift our attention just a moment because Donald Trump is about to introduce a Middle East peace plan. It's very secretive. We're starting to get little hints of what it might be. The concern is he going to try to do another land for peace deals like his presidential predecessors, those failed attempts? Bill Clinton tried it with Yasser Arafat. George Bush tried it with Ehud Olmert. Barack Obama was trying to do it with John Kerry. They all failed. You know why? Because you can't broker God's promised land for an elusive peace with enemies that don't want peace with you, that actually would rather wipe you off the map, that the name of Israel would be remembered no more. Well, whatever Donald Trump comes up with, unless it complies with God's land for peace plan and his roadmap plan, Middle East peace plan, which is written by Jeremiah, and we're going to look at it, Donald Trump's plan will fail also. And here's what Jeremiah said. Remember that when God knows the end from the beginning. So he knew that when he was going to bring the Jews back into the land of Israel, after centuries of the diaspora being scattered out to the nations of the world, and there were many prophecies that said, I will bring the Jews back into their land of Israel. And we see that's been going on for the last 70 years. He knew there would be a problem because the ancient Arab hatred that had plagued the region had never went away. And that's why it was alive and awaiting for them in the wars of 1948 and 67 and 73. But even worse, he now has it under the umbrella of Islam, which is not a peaceful religion, folks. It's actually a religion of violence. And they're targeting the Jews and the Christians. So with that framework, here's what the Lord said he would have to do to make everything work out with his peace plan. And you'll see it's very compassionate. This is Jeremiah chapter 12, verses 14 through 15. Dealing with what we're dealing with right now. He said, thus says the Lord, against all my evil neighbors. Notice that. That's not a very nice word. Who touch the inheritance, the land of Israel, which I have caused my people Israel to inherit. Behold, I will pluck them out of their land, those Arabs, out of that land of Israel. And I will pluck out the house of Judah from among them. Then it shall be after I have plucked them out that I will return, and I will have compassion on them and bring them back, everyone, not just the Jews, to his heritage, and everyone to his land. So here's God's compassionate plan. He's got evil neighbors. They got themselves stuck into the land that's now going to be called Israel. He's going to pluck them out. They're not going to go willingly. He's going to pluck them out. But there's Jews also living in the Arab lands that need to come back into the land of Israel. He's going to have to pluck them out because they've been living there for about 1,800, 1,900 years, learning their cultures and their languages and having their businesses and raising their families and their generations. They've got to be plucked out and be brought back in. God understood the magnitude of this. But he says to them, when I do that, I'm going to have compassion on everybody. I want to make this work out, right? Everyone back to their own heritage. He knew where they all belonged. He knew where all their ancestors are. And we saw this map earlier. After World War I, he started doing that. He took the sovereign position to make this peace plan happen. Egypt got its statehood. 1922, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, we looked at that. After World War I, he's plucking these Arabs out and putting them back in their homelands. He's giving them their statehood. The United Nations couldn't pull this off. This is a sovereign act of God that happened in modernity. And so he goes on to say in his peace plan, verses 16 and 17, and it shall be, if they will learn carefully the ways of my people, the Jewish people, to swear by my name, the God of the Bible, Jehovah, as the Lord lives, as they taught my people to swear by Baal, then they shall be established in the midst of my people. Now let's stop there for a minute. He's saying you just need to swear by my name, the God of the Bible, with the same zeal that you forced my people to swear by your false god, Baal. Now, Baal was a false god back then when Jeremiah wrote. Matter of fact, the Jews were worshiping him and sacrificing their children to Baal. And, of course, that led to their dispersion of 70 years of captivity around 586 BC with the Babylonians. So with that same zeal, I want you to worship the God of the Bible, who's putting this all together. He's putting this compassionate plan together, Middle East peace. Go back to the lands of your ancestry. I'll have compassion on you. But there is a condition. And here's what he says. But if they do not obey, those Arabs, I will utterly pluck up and destroy that nation, says the Lord. The destruction of Arab nations, evil neighbors. How could that be? Well, we're going to see. The Arabs are out of compliance with God's plan. Are they worshiping the God of the Bible? No. They worship Allah, and they're not the same God. I thank Eric Barger for a couple of these slides I'm going to show you. In Surah, Islam rejects the deity of Jesus Christ, Surah 5:17. This is their scriptures in their Quran. Surah 157 and 158, Islam rejects the death of Jesus on the cross. Surah 5:51 says, "O you have believed, do not take the Jews and the Christians as allies. They are allies of one another, and whoever is an ally to them among you, then indeed he is one of them. Allah guides not the wrongdoing people." So if you're a believer, a Christian in here today, or a Jew, you are a wrongdoing people. Allah and Jehovah are not the same God. One last one. It even denies the Trinity and the sonship of Jesus Christ in Surah 4, verses 1 through 171. So believe in Allah and His apostles. Say not Trinity. Desist, it will be greater for you, for Allah is one. Allah, glory be to Him. Far exalted is He above having a son. How many of you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of the God of the Bible? Well, they don't. So don't confuse Allah with Jehovah. So how is God going to execute judgments upon those around Israel, those evil neighbors that are out of compliance with His peace plan? Is it going to be Donald Trump's land for peace deal, if that's what it is? It certainly wasn't Bill Clinton's, George Bush's, etc. Actually, we see that God's going to use the Israeli Defense Forces to accomplish judgments. And they exist in fulfillment of Bible prophecy for the purposes I'm about to tell you. They don't exist in Ezekiel 38 and Armageddon, and I'll show you that in a moment. Why? So we find out in Ezekiel 37 that the Israeli Defense Forces are going to emerge and exist in the end times in fulfillment of biblical prophecies. Ezekiel has this vision of many, many dry bones. They're very dry, and we find as we go by, God asks Ezekiel, "Hey, can these bones live?" And Ezekiel goes, "Oh, you know, God," which was a wise answer. And the bones start coming together, and they come together, and sinews come on, connect the bones, and the flesh comes on. It's an amazing vision Ezekiel has. And we find out in verse 10 that they not only can live, but they can fight. And here's what he says: "So I prophesied as He commanded me, and breath came into them, referring to those dry bones, and they lived and stood upon their feet, an exceedingly great army. Now remember, they came out of the Holocaust as refugees, but look at them today. Okay, so, and then we find out that this is a picture of this dry bone vision in subsequent verses of Israel dwelling out and probably in the Holocaust conditions. It says that I'll bring you back into the land of Israel. I'll open up your graves and bring you back into the land of Israel. Now this happens in Ezekiel 37:11. We're told the condition they're in when this is going to happen. Our bones, this is what the Jewish people are saying out in the nations of the world. At a time they say our bones are dry, our hope is lost, and we ourselves are cut off. And that's how they felt at the time of the Holocaust. And so they come out, and they're going to come out, and they're going to become the Israeli Defense Forces. And God has a plan for that. Now the prognosis for the tents of Edom, the Palestinians, is very grim. Obadiah 1:18 tells us, the house of Jacob shall be a fire. Read that as Israeli Defense Forces. The house of Joseph a flame. Read that also as Israeli Defense Forces. But the house of Esau, the tents of Edom, the Palestinians, shall be stubble, and no survivor shall remain on the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. Remember when Asaph petitioned, make them like whirling dust, burning chaff. And we find here they're going to be stubble, and we're going to see that's significant as we look at another prophecy. So Israel's going to have descendants. There'll be an Israeli remnant, and they'll go into the Messianic kingdom. But Esau's descendants will be no more. He will have no more, no survivors, it says. Very grim future for them. Prophecy has not found fulfillment yet. Here's another one dealing with the tents of Edom. Ezekiel 25 verses 13 through 14. Again, using the Israeli Defense Forces, the house of Joseph, the house of Jacob. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, I will stretch out my hand against Edom, cut off man and beast from it, and make it desolate from Teman, which is also now, it used to be southern Jordan. Of course, Edomites have made their way as the Palestinians into Israel. Dedan, which is Saudi Arabia, shall fall by the sword. I will lay my vengeance on Edom by who? By the hand of my people Israel. The Lord's going to use the Israeli Defense Forces as a tool, that they may do in Edom according to my anger and according to my fury. And they shall know my vengeance, says the Lord God. This has not happened yet. And the Israeli Defense Forces are strong enough to fulfill these judgments against those evil neighbors, that judgments need to be executed upon them. Here's an interesting one that a lot of us are looking at right now with what happened with Donald Trump moving the embassy, U.S. Embassy, to Jerusalem. A lot of us have been looking at Zechariah chapter 12. It says, behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling, of dizziness, unto all the people round about, the evil neighbors, in the environment, in the neighborhood, not the world at large, round about. The Hebrew word is sabyab, and that means the neighborhood. When they lay siege against both Judah and against Jerusalem, folks, they're not done doing that. They've been doing that. But it's every time they try to do that, and when they ultimately try to do it again, it's going to be to them like a cup of trembling, of dizziness, of drunkenness, and dealing with like a poisonous content. But they want Jerusalem. It's their third holiest city, according to Islam, but it's not even mentioned once in the Bible. So they're not done with their pursuits of Jerusalem. And so here's what God says will happen as a result. We read a few verses later. In that day, this whole deal with Jerusalem and Judah trying to lay siege on it, I will make the governors, read that as the captains or the chieftains, the IDF. The Hebrew word right there for governors is eluf or elufim, and that's a word for the lieutenant commanders in the IDF today. I will make the captains and chieftains of Judah like a fire pan in the woodpile, and like a fiery torch in the sheaves. And they shall devour all the surrounding peoples on the right hand and on the left, but Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place. So we have a picture here of the Israeli Defense Forces being used against those people, surrounding peoples. The battlefield will be likened to a fire pan in the woodpile, and the Israeli Defense Forces will be like a torch, and their enemies will be likened to sheaves. Now, who do you think is going to win that war? Obviously, it says they'll be like stubble. The Palestinians will be like stubble. There'll be no survivor. Now we have to ask ourselves, does Israel have people on the right hand and on the left hand that are enemies of Israel, that need judgments executed upon them, evil neighbors? And the answer is yes, they do. And they are in Psalm 83. You've seen this map earlier. So the Israeli Defense Forces exist in fulfillment of Bible prophecy, but what is their primary role? They're going to be IDF will defeat their Arab foes in Psalm 83. I'm going to show you more in Isaiah 17, Jeremiah 49, I just showed you Obadiah 1, Ezekiel 25, Israeli Defense Forces in action, in unfulfilled biblical prophecies. We showed this map earlier. The Jews, the Israeli Defense Forces are not fighting in the first half of the tribulation. They're living in a pseudo-peace. Matter of fact, they seem to be so complacent they can't even stop the Antichrist at the middle of the tribulation from going in to the temple and doing the abominable act. And in the second half, they're fleeing for their lives, right? And even Christ instructed them to flee, the Jewish people. So they're involved in dealing with their Arab foes and protecting Israel. They're not involved in Ezekiel 38. Who stops that supernaturally? Fire, hailstone, brimstone. God does. The Israeli Defense Forces might be involved in burying the dead and converting the fuel, but they're not stopping the invaders. God's doing that. And they're not involved in Armageddon. They're fleeing from the Antichrist who's trying to kill the Jewish people. Final genocide. Jesus Christ takes out the Antichrist. In Revelation 19, verses 11 through 21. Yes, he's our hero, and yes, he wins that war. Well, let's look at a few more things where the judgments are executed upon the evil neighbors by the Israeli Defense Forces. Some of you might be very familiar with this. This is a now prophecy to me. We could wake up at any given time and we could be seeing the destruction of Damascus in Isaiah 17. Isaiah 17:1 says, burden against Damascus. This is the capital of Syria. It is the oldest continuously inhabited city in recorded history. It dates back to the time of Abraham. It still exists, but someday it will not. It says, behold, Damascus will cease from being a city, and it will be a ruinous heap. And as we read verse 9, we find out who's going to be responsible for that. We find out through these verses that in self-defense, Israel has to take out Damascus, but not only Damascus. There's other strong cities. Isaiah 17:9 says, in that day when Damascus is ceasing to be a city, it will be as his strong cities, speaking about other cities in Syria, will be as a forsaken bough and an uppermost branch which they left because of the children of Israel. And there will be desolation caused by the children of Israel. And folks, they've already been threatening to take out Damascus, especially if Syria attacks Tel Aviv, and especially if they use chemical weapons. And here's the real-time application. Verse 14 concludes in Isaiah 17, then behold, at eventide there's trouble, and in the morning he, speaking of Damascus and the masculine pronoun, is no more. Damascus is no more. This is the portion of those who plunder us and the lot of those who rob us. So what it's saying here is one night you're going to see there's trouble brewing over Syria, Israeli threats or whatever it may be of the defense forces on Damascus, and there's trouble. At eventide there's trouble. And you wake up in the morning and you turn on the Fox News, and it's not going to exist anymore because of self-defense. They've been plundering, and those who rob us, it talks about here in those verses. Israel has the technology to take out Damascus. So Damascus is going to go. The Israeli Defense Forces are involved in that. What about Jordan? Jordan has this peace treaty. And some of my colleagues go that, this has already been fulfilled. Jordan's got a peace treaty with Israel. Well, there's prophecies we're going to look at here where that peace treaty does not appear. And these are unfulfilled. And they are dealing specifically with Jordan and a war with Israel. And here's what it says. Jeremiah 49, verse 2. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will cause to be heard an alarm of war of Rabbah of the Ammonites. Now that is associated with the capital of Ammon, Jordan. Rabbah of the Ammonites. Alarm of war. It shall be a desolate mound, and her villages shall be burned with fire. Then Israel shall take possession of his inheritance, says the Lord. It's going to be a desolate mound. It sounds almost like what's going to happen to Damascus, a ruinous heap. Ammon, Jordan is going to be a desolate mound, it sounds like here, and because of the children of Israel. And Israel will move into the territory. It says Israel will take possession of his inheritance. We have a picture here of Jordan in a war with Israel, and Israel annexing more territory, which they do. Joshua did it 3,300 years ago. King David and King Solomon did it about 3,000 years ago. The Israeli Defense Forces did it in 1967, and they're not done doing it. And I'll tell you how that all fits into God's promise to them in the Abrahamic covenant shortly. Let's look at another Jordan prophecy, because I want to hammer this home. People think that this peace treaty with Israel and Jordan is going to avoid more conflicts with Israel and Jordan, but it's not the case. Zephaniah chapter 2, verses 8 through 9 says, I have heard a reproach of Moab. Now that's central Jordan. and the insults of the people of Ammon, that's northern Jordan, with which they have approached my people and made arrogant threats against their borders, the borders of Israel, arrogant threats. The residue of my people, the Israeli defense forces, shall plunder them, and the remnant of my people, the Israelis, shall possess them. Again, winning a war, another proof text that Israel is going to expand into parts of Jordan. Matter of fact, I read Obadiah chapter 1, verse 18. The Israeli defense forces taking out the Palestinians, reducing them to stubble, and no survivor of the house of Esau. He goes on to say what happens in the aftermath in verses 19 and 20, Obadiah. Israel's going to annex territory. They're going to take over southern Jordan, the Gaza, the West Bank, the Golan Heights. They're even going to take over parts of southern Lebanon. It's called Zarephath. And Israel's going to expand territorially. You know, Abraham was promised a lot of land, that Israel has never really occupied all that land, yet his descendants. And it was for him and his descendants, that he would be a great nation. Genesis 15:18 tells us that to your descendants I have given this land from the river of Egypt, the great river, that would be likely the Nile, to the river Euphrates, which courses through Syria and Iraq. You see, that's all in that inner circle land there. That belongs to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Presently, Israel is about the size of New Jersey. You see that little sliver of blue up there. At some point, they're going to get all that land over there, and if we took an estimate on how much land that is, that would be 36 different more Israels than we have today, taking over all that land. And I don't believe they're going to get all that land just as a result of Psalm 83. I think Jesus, when he returns, will give them all that land, the remnant, all that land. But I do believe they're going to move and expand territorially. It'll increase the defensibility of their borders. They believe that is their land, according to their promise here in Genesis 15:18 and elsewhere. And they have a precedent of doing that, like I said, with Joshua, David, and 1967. And the other thing that's going to have to happen, I think, around that time, is there's this big gold dome sitting where they want to build their temple. And they'll be in a position after Psalm 83 to get rid of that. Now, I don't know that they're going to do it that way. So as I start to wind down and summarize, Psalm 83 is a confederacy of countries. You see them up there on the right side of the screen. There's their modern day equivalents. They want to destroy the nation of Israel, that the name of Israel will be remembered no more. If it's a prophecy for our time, and I believe it is, they don't want a two-state solution. They don't want peace with the Jews. They want peace without the Jews. They want to wipe them off the map, and they want to have another Arab state for the tents of Edom. That's what I'm looking for there. Now let's take a look at Psalm 83 versus Ezekiel 38. I said they're not the same prophecies. We have different enemies, inner circle of Muslim countries, Arabs around them, versus an outer ring of countries that don't share common borders with Israel. We have different motives. They want to take the land, and the Psalm 83 invaders, Russia's coming for Israel's livelihood, the plunder and great booty which Israel will possess at that time when they're dwelling securely, without walls, bars, nor gates. The defeat is by the IDF in Psalm 83, but the Lord has to stop the Russian advance of Gog and Magog supernaturally. It will end the ancient Arab hatred of the Jews once and for all that has plagued the region from time immemorial. Ezekiel 38 God will use that event to make the nations know He's the holy God, make His holy name known. So as we answer those questions I featured earlier, why does Russia need such formidable allies to attack little tiny Israel? If that were to happen today, as many of our colleagues are thinking it's going to happen real soon, it would be like if Donald Trump, we got the midterms coming up, if he said, well, New Jersey's going to vote Democrat, we better get Canada and the United States and Mexico to go, deal with New Jersey. That's how ridiculous it seems to me to think that Russia's going to put all that formidable coalition against little tiny Israel right now before Psalm 83. Well, let's say that they take a war, they go to war. Let me backtrack. I want to say this right. Let's say that Middle America says, we don't need Canada, and you guys don't want to be involved anyways, right? And we don't need Mexico. We can take out New Jersey. Come on. We don't need all these big allies. We're having trade issues. We want to build a wall around Mexico. We don't need them. We'll take them out. And let's say that's a miscalculation, assuming there's like that inner circle like the Psalm 83 countries coming against Israel. Let's say New Jersey wins that war, and they start expanding territorially into the United States, and they take over the police departments and the nuclear facilities and this sort of thing. And all of a sudden, maybe they need a little more help. Maybe we need Canada. Maybe we need... And so I'm trying to use the analogy. the Israel that we're going to see Russia invade, I believe, is different than the ones we're looking at right now. I believe they're going to have won a war, they're going to expand territorially. That's why Russia needs big friends to come after them. And that's why those big friends don't include any of the same enemies in Psalm 83, because they've already been taken out as a result of Psalm 83. Why did Ezekiel not list them? He's very specific about the whole prophecy. And he does not even list Ezekiel's notorious enemies at all, that inner circle. And Russia's got to come through those lands with their invaders. And they're not even mentioned once. Why do they have different motives? Well, Israel's expanded. The land's not the issue so much anymore. Israel's livelihood is they're prospering. Jews are flocking in, bringing money, taking the spoils of war. Why are there different defeats? Why does God have to do it? Well, because Israeli defense forces won't be strong enough to take on the Russian advance as they were able to take out the Psalm 83 countries. Now, I've just got a few more minutes, and I wanted to talk about something amazing that the Lord's doing in another prophecy that's been vastly overlooked that I'm looking at that could happen even before the destruction of Damascus. It's dealing with Jeremiah chapter 49, a prophecy of Elam. We talked about Iran in Ezekiel 38 under the banner of Persia. Iran is the problem in the Middle East right now. It's the elephant in the room with their nuclear aspirations. They want to wipe Israel off the map. They're not part of Psalm 83. They are part of Ezekiel 38. But they're mentioned twice. They have a double jeopardy in the end times, dual prophecies in the end times. They're not just mentioned in Ezekiel 38. We've got mention of Persia and also a territory called Elam. And Elam is written about by Jeremiah in chapter 49. And he's dealing with 6 verses, chapter 49, verses 34 through 39. And it says it's a latter-day prophecy. So when we look at a modern-day map today of Iran, you have Persia, which is about 3/4 of the country, and Elam, that shaded area in the kind of orangish peach color, is Elam. It hugs the western side of Iran by the Persian Gulf. And they've been always geographically isolated from each other, Persia and Elam, but they are part of modern-day Iran. Now, Ezekiel wrote about Persia around 580 BC, but Jeremiah wrote about, decade or two prior in 596 BC about Elam, and they both called their prophecies latter-day prophecies, and they're not the same prophecies. And I point that out in a book I've written out there called Nuclear Showdown in Iran, dealing with this prophecy that's been vastly overlooked, which I believe could be a nuclear prophecy. So I'm going to play a quick video on it, and then I'm going to conclude by showing you something supernatural the Lord's doing in the Middle East, because I don't really have time to go over this prophecy for you at any great length.
By far the most important thing today, not only today, but in a historical perspective, the most important thing is to make sure that a militant regime, a militant Islamic regime or a militant Islamic movement does not get its hands on the weapons of mass destruction.
Missiles cloud Mideast skies over the Persian Gulf. Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz. Arab oil is choked off to world markets. Hezbollah and Hamas launch scores of missiles into Israel. Terror cells initiate cycles of violence in America. About 2,600 years ago, the Hebrew prophets Jeremiah and Ezekiel issued parallel end times prophecies concerning modern-day Iran. Today, the rogue country is becoming a nuclear nation and aggressively advancing its hegemony throughout the greater Middle East. Nuclear Showdown in Iran, revealing the ancient prophecy of Elam, is a non-fiction thriller taking the reader on a journey of discovery through the eyes of the prophets and the minds of today's key national players. But there's a backstory, an even bigger story. It's a spiritual showdown in Iran between Islam and Christianity.
Iran is being transformed into a Christian nation in this generation. Iran has the fastest growing evangelical population in the world. Iranians are experiencing miracles, healings, visions, and dreams. And with the help of satellite television, millions of them are coming to Christ. 2 years ago, Iranian government began cracking down on Christianity. But it's not working. Christianity is growing in Iran. Iran is in the Bible prophecy, and many Iranian Christians are excited about what the Bible says about the future of Iran. Please pray for your brothers and sisters in Iran.
That is Hormoz Shariat of Iran Alive Ministries. Joel Rosenberg calls him the Billy Graham of Iran. He has a satellite television network, TV show that goes into millions of households in Iran. He's leading many people to the Lord with the help of the Lord, who is doing supernatural things over there. I'm going to show you a video on that in just a moment. But Iran is the fastest growing evangelical population of the world, growing at 19.6% per year. People are having dreams, visions, miracles, and healings. And they are leaving Islam and they're coming to Christianity. I've had the opportunity to be on his TV show many times, and I teach prophecies I've been teaching today, but he translates them into Farsi. And these people are hungering to know the Lord. They're persecuted if you're a Christian there. They've shut down the churches. You'll be thrown in jail. If you're a pastor, you could be killed. You'll certainly be beaten to a pulp, and they hope you'll die there. It's a real bad situation where missionaries don't really even want to go into. But yet the Lord is going in there. He's rolling up his sleeve, and he's making things happen supernaturally. So I'm just going to briefly summarize that prophecy. What happens is the Lord gets really angry in the end times at the leadership of Israel, and he's going to bring about a disaster there. And we know he's angry with the leadership because he's going to ultimately destroy from there the kings and the princes. You would not destroy good kings, that there's bad kings and presidents, ayatollahs, etc., leadership. He's going to break the bow because they want to launch something lethal somewhere. He's going to stop that from happening at the foremost of their might. Could that be nuclear? That would be perhaps the case. They want to launch something lethal, perhaps nuclear somewhere. The Lord's going to stop that, and when he stops it, it's going to create a disaster. The Lord's going to stop it. And he's going to, and when the disaster happens, it's going to be so bad that the affected population in that Elam area, well, you saw the map, which is where the Bushehr nuclear reactor is, which is a nuclear disaster waiting to happen, and Russia's going to build more over there. 8 more they got planned in that area. It's going to create a disaster. It says the indigenous population is going to be dispersed into the nations of the world. It'll be a worldwide dispersion as a result of this disaster. I think it's nuclear, and I put forward that argument in the book. Iran will have enemies at the time. It talks about there being a whole menu of enemies. You got Saudi Arabia is concerned about it. Israel is concerned. The international community, especially America, is concerned about Iran. This could happen now at the present time. And it says then he will send the sword after them. It sounds military versus an earthquake scenario. But Hormoz Shariat said at the end, there's 4 bad verses about what's going to happen to Iran, but there are 2 good verses, 38 and 39 of Jeremiah 49. And Hormoz Shariat said millions of Iranians are excited about what the Bible has to say about their future, because there are 2 verses in there. It says the Lord's going to set his throne up in Elam, and he's going to restore from there the captives of Elam, those ones that get shipped, dispersed into the nations of the world at the time of disaster. They're going to be restored back into Elam. So these Christians more people in Iran know this prophecy than Americans do. They've been hearing about this. They're excited about this prophecy because of those 2 verses. And because it's interacting with what's going on with the Lord and what he's doing over there. Now I'm going to close out with a video that talks about what the Lord's doing in Iran supernaturally. You're not going to want to miss this. Now, some of it's
hopelessness and despair. These are the words that best describe the current situation in Iran. As a result, Iran has one of the highest suicide rates in the world. Hi, my name is Hormoz Shariat, and I'm the president of Iran Alive Ministries. What you're about to see is an actual story that happened here during a broadcast at Iran Alive. This is a story of a life transformed by the power of the gospel. Watch this, and I will see you after the video.
و حتی مثلا از سن 4-5 سالگی شروع کردم نماز رو یاد گرفتن و مثلا قبل از اینکه وارد مدرسه بشم سوره های قرآن رو حفظ میکردم. دین هستن اینا خیلی شستشون مغزی ما رو میکردن و اگرم یه همچین چیزی میشنیدم خوشحال میشدم، ولی همیشه به ما میگفتن حتی اگر یه مسیحی رو بکشیم وارد بهشت میشیم. و برای همین بیشتر تلاش میکردم که قانونهای مذهب رو دقیق‌تر انجام بدم. فکر میکردم وضوء اشتباه گرفتم، دوباره هی میرفتم وضوء میگرفتم، شاید این مثلا برای یه نماز 10 بار تکرار میشد که من میرفتم وضوء میگرفتم و برمیگشتم. و مریضی روحی هم که گرفتم، افسرده وحشتناکم بودم. احساس کردم که هیچ وقت به خدا نرسیدم و مامانم تو حالت مرگ بود. خیلی هم وابسته بودم به مامانم و گفتم که من خودمو میکشم اگه اجازه ندید تو خونه این کارو بکنم، بیرون از خونه خودکشی میکنم.
تو جوونی، تو آینده داری مامان جان.
و گفتم باشه اگر دوست داری با هم خودکشی کنیم.
My brothers and sisters, I'm with you tonight. The Lord has a special message for you tonight. If you're hopeless, if you're oppressed, if you're planning to commit suicide, the Lord says stop. He has a hope and a future for you. If you're planning to kill yourself, stop and call me.
و برای نیم ساعت با کشورما صحبت کرد. کاری که کردم انجام میدم و اگر تو بخوای پشیمون بشی من خودم تنها این کار میکنم. وقتی که رفتم توی اتاق دیدم مامانم داره دعای توبه رو میکنه و خیلی عصبانی شدم.
به من ندیان، نه چایش میکنم. نمیخوام باش حرف بزنم، ولم کن. نمیخوام، قطع کن بینم. چی داره خدا فردینا؟ نمیخوام. دست بازی نکن. قطع کن. خجالت بده. هرمز مگه کیه؟ ولم کن. کشیش هرمز کیه؟ ولی شما گفتین اگه کسی
When I talked to her, she was cold, she was fighting, and she told me very proudly, I'm going to kill myself, and your Jesus cannot do anything for me. After about an hour of argument with her, and I couldn't change her mind.
عیسی من به تو ایمان میارم.
You said it yourself. Allah has done nothing for you. Give Jesus just one chance. You can always kill yourself next week.
وقتی که این فکر اومد توی سرم گفتم این بهترین راهه که یه بار دیگه تا آخرین لحظه مرگم به الله خدمت کنم.
She was thinking, okay, I'll pray, and next week, this time, Jesus had not done anything for me. I call live on the air and I tell everybody, look, I tried Jesus for a week and nothing has changed, and I'm going to kill myself tonight, and I will do it on the air.
و بعد از یک هفته که خودکشی میکنم حداقلش اینه که وقتی به حضور خدا میرم میگم آخرین کارم من برای تو انجام دادم. فردا صبحش که از خواب بیدار شدم، ساعت نیمه شب بود که از خواب بیدار شدم، دیدم که مامانم خیلی راحت داره تو خونه راه میره و دیگه اونطوری نیست که تعادل نداشته باشه یا دستش رو جایی بگیره. گفتم ما باید سریع بریم بیمارستان و وقتی که جوابو سریع گرفتیم دکتر گفتش که فقط میتونم بگم یه معجزه شده چون هیچ اثری از بیماری MS نیست.
چجوری میشه؟ شما خودتون گفتین که ایشون ترمینال
بود
داشت میمون.
خانم یه معجزه است و به یه امام دعا کردین، شما کجا نشون دادین؟ خانم این شبیه یک معجزه است. این یک معجزه است.
ما اصلا به هیچ امامی دعا نکردیم. به عیسی مسیح دعا کردیم.
So that's what Jesus is doing in places like Iran. She said Jesus could do nothing for me, but he said give him a chance. And he's not only doing that there, he's doing it in other parts of the world. He's even doing it here. He's responding to people's prayers and needs. And if you need something, have you considered giving Jesus the chance to be involved in your life? Like Billy said, if you haven't made a decision for Jesus, then you don't want to put that off at all, considering what he's talked about, what you see is going to happen in the Middle East. But even if you have made a decision for Jesus, are you calling upon him on the level that you should? And embracing him in your life the way he's there. He's there for her. He's in the miracle business. So let's pray. Lord, we thank you so much for this wonderful conference and these prophecies you've given us. Sometimes they're hard to accept, sometimes they're hard to discern, but the bottom line is we know you give them to us as a gift because you want us to know what's coming our way. And for that, we give you all of our love and praise and glory. We thank you for that you care enough to let us know. And we just pray that we'll be affected by the things we're learning at this conference and that we will give you a chance in all the things that we do. We'll ask you to intercede. And you want to do that, and we're so thankful that you're part of our lives. We ask that it will be effective for you as we go out into this world with this information. And bless the rest of this time at this conference. And in Jesus' name, all God's people said, amen.